So let's talk about the Spider Within a Spider-Verse story. Now, I think the thing that made us all excited for this is it has the voices starring Shamik Morris, Miles Morales, Brian Tyree Henry, and we knew it was, typical Spider-Verse animation and things like that. So that's exciting. And it was about anxiety, which I think we all have to a degree nowadays. Animation-wise is great. The acting is really good. Nobody phoned it in, but I think because it was Return to Spider-Verse and everyone loves Spider-Verse, and getting a little more Spider-Verse content is always cool. And that this is about anxiety and taking it head on. It did take it on, and it's kind of this became a straight up horror film at a certain point. There's a shadowy paralysis demon that looked like the Uncle Boom Wee, I think, foreign film that was big a long time, 15 years ago, if anyone remembers that. I didn't review it, but I saw part of it, but it had these weird guys in the forest with red eyes. It kind of reminded me of that, but it becomes first you have to get good grades, you have to be Spider-Man, you have to do this, you have to do that, and then it becomes sort of overwhelms him when he ignores his dad before, who wants to watch movies and eat popcorn and watch horror movies, which honestly sounds really fucking cool. If my dad asked me to do that, I probably wouldn't. My dad doesn't like horror movies, so I would have been down. But he actually then, after he has all that anxiety, asks his dad so he could just take a walk and talk about it, which sort of doesn't feel like what the movies are like, to be honest with you. But I thought was a good stance on mental health. This is made in partnership with the Kevin Love Fund. I do think this takes mental health very well. And it sort of reminds me of when I read comics in the 90s, they'd put out some Spider-Man and Wolverine do take on a big public issue thing, and they'd be fine and stuff like that. I think this is probably one of the better ones I've ever seen of a charity comic type of story. It's one of the better ones I've ever seen. I think it takes it on responsibly. It also takes it on very much like the visuals of a Spider-Verse thing. It didn't feel like anyone was sort of kind of phoning it in or anything. It seemed like everyone was very committed to get this to work. So it kind of plays better than it probably does writing wise. But I do feel like it does sort of play inconsequential. It sort of doesn't feel like the characters with the walk thing. I sort of feel like Miles wouldn't necessarily do that. But I do think it's also important to let kids know they can talk to someone and they can just get the stress off themselves and stuff. I think meditation's pretty cool too. I thought it was very well done. I don't think I would show it to my kids necessarily. I felt it got a little too intense for the little ones. Frankly, I don't want to be an asshole about it, but I just felt like I wouldn't. It got a little too horror-y for the kids, whereas I think the Spider-Verse thing is a little more all ages, it's a little more for the older kids, but that's fine. We're trying to talk about mental health and stuff like that. So it did get a little more intense, but I thought it was well done. It just plays like a charity comic. It gets the issue across. It does it in an entertaining way. It seemed like they cared about it and were committed to making the best it could. You could not watch this and be sort of okay and following stuff. It is what those things are. They use those characters to get you into it and get you to think about these things. And I guess that's a positive. But if you're expecting, him to swing around and get these cool visuals and stuff, I don't think you're going to get that. But you do get more of a horrific thing than I think most people would do with it. And I think is the difference between having an actual filmmaker do it and someone who's just trying to push the message and stuff. And I think you got someone who was able to do both actually very well. I thought it was pretty well directed on that front and probably better than it has any right to be. But it doesn't necessarily, much like those charity comics that most people would just ignore and just keep reading comics in continuity. You don't really need it, but if you're really a junkie for more Spider-Verse, and aren't we all, it's a nice little short, but I don't think it's anything more. I don't think it's necessarily essential to the Spider-Verse story, but I think it does its message, tells you that and expresses that in a very healthy kind of way, in a visual way that'll probably make you think about it a little more, even if you probably would roll your eyes at the idea of these sort of things if you hadn't watched it. I will say the other thing about it is I have anxiety and a lot going on, and it did actually feel very intense, and the ending did actually feel nice and relieving in a way that I was surprised by. I think sometimes you do need someone to sort of talk to and get out your emotions, or at least do something to not let it. But sometimes, anxiety and depression and stuff, you really can't fight it and you can't do anything, even if you're Spider-Man. And I think that was one of the things I did quite like about this, is it really got that across, and I think it really said something about anxiety that I think what it was trying to do. So